An old tin of cookies, a birthday, and a 12-year-old's throwaway line. Those are for poor people. She doesn't argue. She lifts the lid, takes the sweetness home, and lets silence do its work. What follows isn't revenge. It's a kitchen turned into a kindness machine. 2 each, third if your day ran longer than it's right. A window, a line of hungry kids, and a boy who thought he knew the price of things, learning what they're worth. Will a ledger, a hairnet, and a faded ribbon mend what words cracked open? The tin. See what travels? Morning arrived flat and serviceable, laying itself along the laminate like a ruler and stopping at the sink's rim. A round tin waited with its lid askew. Roses faded to patient brown where red once kept its promise. She touched the rim with her knuckles. It's a greeting for objects that keep working whether they are greeted or not. She set out tools as if placing words in a sentence that would hold nested cups. Spoon worn to an oval, a knife whose straight spine made a horizon. Flour canister opened with a polite sigh. She scooped, wrapped, drew the back of the knife across to level the hill. Snowfall returned to paper, then to jar. Butter came next, salted, wrapped in paper that remembered cold. 2 sticks on the plate by the window, wrappers smoothed and folded because wrappers later grease pans and thrift doesn't retire. The recipe card lived in the small box of family appetite. Corners furred soft, a butter ring translucent at the lower left. Chocolate chip underlined once. Cream butter and sugars until light like early cloud. Her own note from a younger hand. The card had traveled with her through 3 kitchens. 2 stoves, one winter when butter softened by a radiator because patience. Alone couldn't warm a room. She warmed the mixing bowl with a tap and dried it with a towel whose edges frayed like lace. Brown sugar packed and released with a thud. White sugar leveled quick and true. Butter yielded and pushed back, willing, not melted. She cubed it on the wrapper and slid it into the bowl. The mixer descended from the high shelf, older than the tin and still a citizen of the house. Not yet, the card said by silence. Vanilla waits. She set 2 eggs on the counter to shrug off their refrigerator seriousness and rolled them under her palm. She creamed by wooden spoon first. Then let steel finish what shoulders began. Vanilla ran in a small, generous ribbonora, rising, doing its one bright task, then settling. Eggs, one by one. Flour, salt, a half scant of baking soda learned from years of exuberant spread. The dry folded into the wet until streaks vanished and the bowl remembered it was one thing. Chips last, measured by listening, a handful another. The scrape of the stubborn few that cling to a bag's seam. Parchment tore clean from the roll. A sheet lay flat on a tray that sighed from remembered heat. The oven's flame bloomed behind steel. The door stayed shut because saved heat does its best work unseen. Spoonfuls found their ovals with tidy spaces between, an old geometry of patience. She set the pan inside, closed the door, turned the small cube timer without looking. The kitchen exhaled. She lifted the card, though she knew every line. Magneted to the fridge, it would not wander. On the blank margin, she penciled one word and the day's number, birthday, because records keep quiet promises. Butter wrappers waited in their square. The knife rested, its straight back. The tin watched with its lid ajar, not yet asked to carry anything, ready to. Inside the oven. Edges lifted and moved inward, gold traveling like sunlight across a floor. Morning kept its modest light. The room kept its steadiness. The tin on. The counter held its silence, an empty place with a job, certain it would be filled. She rinsed the spoon, leaned it to dry, and listened for the first soft crack of edges, setting small proof that patience becomes sweetness under heat. Today, too, the morning decided on weather without asking her. A fine rain beaded the window. When she tied her shoes, the kind that doesn't cancel a plan, only shortens a step. She set the tin's lid square, slid the recipe box into the drawer, and told the room she would return. Butter would wait on the plate. Eggs and brown sugar required a walk. She took the canvas bag from its hook, tucked a small umbrella into the side pocket, and stepped into the hall's cool breath. The stairwell smelled of old paint and damp wool. On the street, awnings held the line of water like steady hands. She skirted a puddle at the curb and crossed toward the florist, where buckets were set out to let the sky do the watering. Carnations made their small argument for color. She pictured a vase in the kitchen window and kept moving. Today was for ingredients, not ornament. The market's bell gave its unshowy note. She nodded to Mr. Gomez at the register, his pencil. Behind his ear, as usual, he lifted his chin, a greeting that saves words for prices and weather. Eggs first. She opened a carton the way a person opens a book worth rereading, checked each oval for cracks, and turned one to hide a speck. Brown sugar waited in paper bags that yielded slightly when pre-softness that promised it would pack and loosen, like damp sand. She took to thinking of birthdays and of children who lean hard on afternoons. Near an end cap, ribbon and paper plates with gilt rims made a brief case for fuss. She measured a length of ribbon between finger and thumb, then let it fall. She added vanilla because the bottle at home had learned to tilt more air than liquid, and a box of salt because small boxes pretend to be bottomless until a careful shake meets silence. At the cooler, she chose a pint of milk, enough for tea, and a glass. Rain stitched quiet lines across the front window. Outside blurred into usefulness. At the register, Mr. Gomez wrote totals with a flourished 7 and a careful 3. He double-bagged the eggs, slid the receipt under the bread knot, so it wouldn't run away, and said, "Soft day." "Soft is fine," she answered, folding bills that still remembered the bank's drawer. Outside, the rain felt like permission. She let it thread the air between umbrella ribs and sidewalk and listened to tires write brief notes on wet asphalt. At the crosswalk, she paused, not for traffic, but for a boy persuading a reluctant dog in a raincoat. The light changed. She crossed. The bag made a dark stripe where the sugar leaned. She shifted it, felt the good weight, the ordinary promise of what a kitchen could make. On the stoop, she closed the umbrella with the care of a person finishing a paragraph, took water to the side so the neighbor's mat would keep its dignity, and climbed. The apartment received her with the quiet of rooms that stay put. She set eggs on the counter, slid sugar into the jar with both hands, squared the bag's folded top, and left the umbrella to dry. The rain kept its small work at the window. The butter, patient on its plate, had relaxed into usefulness. She hung the canvas bag back on its hook. She washed her hands and began again. Steam fogged the window a finger's width while the clock kept ordinary time. And the room remembered what ovens do best, quietly. The timer on her stove ticked the way small clocks tick when they mean well. Beside it, the first tray cooled on a rack that bowed slightly at the center, a metal memory of many batches and years. Steam rose from the cookies, a thin ribbon of brown sugar and butter. She did not eat one yet. Waiting was part of the recipe, though it never made the card. She folded a dish towel in halves and slid it under the rack's foot to even it. There had been a boy once who called walnuts little moons because halves looked like something the sky would keep in a pocket. He had stood on a chair with rubber feet and pushed chips off the counter with his breath. The chair, the boy, the moons, none of them were here now. The recipe remembered for everyone. She could name the stoves by the way heat behaved. The alley window. Oven ran hot left and a little sulky right. The coil top hummed like a fly against glass. The current one kept its word if you gave it time to prove itself. Cookies taught her patience and forgiving in equal measure. How to turn a tray halfway. How to trust that pale centers would set. How to accept an edge darker than planned and give it to the person who liked a little crunch. The old metal tin had once held tea biscuits from a holiday someone else celebrated. Its lid used to fit with a confident kiss. Now it met the rim with a whisper. When a batch went in, paper separated layers with tidy quarters. And the sound the stack made a soft ceramic hush was the kitchen's version of applause at school fairs. She learned to cut her squares neat and even, not because neatness. Made them sweeter, but because hands picked more gently when pieces respected themselves. Sure-wrapped plates for neighbors' lace of wax paper, a tuck under. A string tied once, and loop tan did not attach notes. She taught 2 children and one husband the rule of cooling 5 minutes on the rack before you can steal, 10 before the stealing doesn't leave a print. They obeyed until they didn't, and then laughed when a thumb told on them. In a drawer lay the wooden spoon with a burn scar where it rested too close to a coil. The spoon never pretended innocence, yet it stirred like a veteran who knows what matters. The bowl carried fine scratches that caught light. Her hands fit these things the way certain songs fit a voice. Once, during a storm, the power failed just as a sheet went in. She left the door shut and set a kettle on the gas flame by match. When the lights returned, the cookies had finished in the dark on retained heat. Softer than usual, better for it. That tray taught her as much as any card. The timer chimed up. Small, agreeable note to say the next batch was ready to move. She lifted the paper by the corners and slid the new circles onto the rack. Air passed around them. The tin waited, lid tilted, ready to carry small warmth across town. She turned the timer once more. She could hear the city deciding on lunchtime the elevator cable. The bus stop sigh dot. What the card never wrote and the hand always knew. Sweetness is a history kept in cupboard's chip timer. Bowed rack, A. Boys, moons, a spoon with a scar and brought forward in circles that cooled to the patience of a room. Today, the house announced itself before the doorbell did. Helium rubbed the ceiling in patient knocks where balloons gathered, each tied to a chair back with ribbon that curled like spent waves. A paper banner sagged between 2 bits of tape that had already decided to let go. Happy birthday whispered down in glitter letters that shed as guests brushed under. The porch smelled of wet pavement and frosting. She climbed the 3 steps with the tin steady in her hands and pressed the bell. Inside, a cheer traveled room to room like wind through open doors. Her daughter-in-law answered with a smile that asked the afternoon to be easy. "You made it," she said, and stepped aside so the hallway could widen. Coats already crowded the rack. A stroller leaned open, wheels damp. From the den, a game on television kept its own loud weather. Cousins in jerseys streaked by like small comets, socks sliding on polished wood, numbers blurred with speed. Someone shouted, "Team Red." Someone else corrected, "We're the Wolves." The house held both truths without complaint. In the kitchen, the table had been dressed for photographs. A plastic runner shimmered as if a small river had been set there to hold dishes in place. A bakery cake sat its center on a white pedestal, a glossy dome of frosting smoothed to a showroom sheen. The bakery's ribbon still circled the box lid, tucked under like a polite hand. Silver balloons spelled the boy's name above it, letters fat and certain. Around the cake, smaller pieces took their seats. Cupcakes in uniform swirls, each crowned with a plastic pennant. A tray of fruit cut into obedient cubes, raspberries shining like buttons. A charcuterie board arranged by someone's careful idea of wilderness, crackers marching, salami rosettes posing near grapes that remembered the walk from the store. Labels remained on corners like signatures gourmet, artisan, handcrafted by people who lived behind glass. Clear clamshells reflected light as though each grape had its own stage. Dips wore lids half peeled back to prove they were new. At one end of the counter, a tower of napkins declared birthday in block letters so cheerful they could not imagine. Whether at the other end, paper plates rimmed in foil made promises about sturdiness. A dispenser of punch swam with citrus slices that touched the spigot like fish testing glass. The refrigerator door opened and shut in a steady rhythm. Cans joined their family by sound alone. "Put that anywhere," her daughter-in-law said, meaning the tin. Meaning everywhere and nowhere. Meaning the table which had no space left for anything not already part of the tableau. She shifted the tin to one hand, lifted a stack of napkins with the other, and blinked at the glossy parade. Steam from the hinge still warmed her wrist. She kept the lid closed, not to hide, only to keep heat from leaving a place that had earned. It dot the boy birthday hat, pushed askew by momentum drifted clothes long enough to accept a hug without stopping. He smelled of new cotton and soap and air moving fast. "Hi, Nana," he said. Eyes passed her at a cousin mid-tackle. He lifted a hand toward the cake, palm flat, claiming without touching, "It's from Sterling." The name landed like an announcement the room already knew. She nodded. Sterling made fine cakes, smooth as mirrors. She liked mirrors for being honest about fingerprints. Adults navigated with plates and phones, mastering the turn from island to table without collision. Someone lifted a lid to ask if wings were mild or brave. Someone else admired the frosting roses in a tone that suggested they knew how much roses cost. The candles waited in their small cellophane sleeve like matches not yet given a job. A playlist. Negotiated corners. Cheerful songs sliding away from the den's separate argument about first downs and blown calls. The house took all the noises and made them neighbors. She set the tin on a narrow stretch of counter, beside a stack of plastic forks and a jar of striped straws. The tin's roses, faded and calm, faced the cake's roses, new and sure of themselves. She rested her hand on the lid. Warmth pressed back through paint and dent. She lifted the lid a finger's width and closed it again, the way one checks a pocket in a crowd here. Present, later. Her daughter-in-law touched her elbow and said, "We'll cut cake after presents," which meant there was a schedule and a photograph waiting to be filled. She smiled and said, "Perfect," which meant she could wait. A balloon bumped her shoulder and drifted on. Glitter from the banner found her sleeve and stayed. The cousins thundered through again, trailed by a small guest dragging a blanket. Whose corner had learned every floor in the house? The cakes shone. The labels held their corners. Somewhere a candle would count. She stood in the kitchen with her tin and her patience, an ordinary shape in a room curated to gleam, and listened as the afternoon laid out its polite sequence. Leaving no space yet for anything that did not come stamped and wrapped, she waited. For the lull parties always give the minute between laughter and the next. Instruction then slid the tin's lid aside and let heat step into the room. The smell rose without announcement. Brown sugar and butter waking vanilla where it rested. She set a white plate on the narrowest clear of counter, wiped it once with her palm, and began to stack the circles. Steam lifted in quick ribbons, met the cooler room. A vanishing that meant sweetness was leaving and arriving at once. They were not uniform, they were themselves. Some wore a darker hem. A few carried salt like a constellation. Chips glistened until air told them to behave. She made one neat stack in the center, then another around it, a slow spiral only she could see. The plate warmed under the weight. For a moment the room smelled like earlier years. "Where should these go?" she asked, not loudly. Her daughter-in-law glanced up from aligning forks beside the cake and pointed toward the island. Already crowded by curated plenty? There was a gap the size of a book beside the charcuterie wilderness. She slid the plate into the space. It fit, like a sentence tucked between two exclamations. A cousin in a jersey paused, sniffed, and then ran on. An aunt reached, caught herself, and said, "Oh, after presents," in the tone parties used to keep the afternoon from tripping. The playlist changed key. She returned the tin to her bag because tins are for travel, not display. The plate looked smaller than the cake and larger than its permission. She stood back, gave it the room of a breath, and saw the table organize itself around it. The fruits-obedient cubes faced sweetness without envy. Penitent cupcakes kept their crowns. Her circles cooled to the exact temperature at which stealing leaves no evidence. No one stole. The boy drifted in and out of the kitchen, a tide on a schedule written in wrapping paper. He lifted the cake's lid by a bare inch to reassure himself the mirror-smooth hill still existed. He did not glance at the plate. He did not need to. Adults did what they do, complimented the punch, worried whether candles would outrun a camera, praised piping, discussed parking. Someone said, "It smells like a bakery in here," which was almost true if bakeries ran on butter. And memory. She adjusted one cookie that listed to the side, not for show, for safety. A ribbon brushed her wrist and fled. Glitter from the banner found the platter's rim and stayed. Outside, the rain recommenced its light hand. "Okay, presents." The host called, and the house obeyed, bodies flowing down the hall like a pleased river. She stayed a breath longer, alone with the plate and the noise receding. It's that one extra circle on top-hand anchor against the sudden quiet that follows movement. It wasn't ceremony. It was weight and consideration in the den tissue paper, lifted like small birds and landed as softer mess. The boy's name appeared on boxes and tags. She sat on the arm of a chair where she could be nearby without binging in the way. From here, the kitchen lay in a diagonal, plate modest in the far. Light, the smell kept its place. For a few more minutes, earlier years remained visible. The way heat shows itself above a road, wavering, ordinary, happening whether or not anyone names it. Down the hall, a cheer rose. In the kitchen, the plate waited like a held note, sure of its small duty. The presents ended with ribbon clinging to socks and a cardboard fort taking shape by accident. Someone announced candles. The crowd rotated toward the kitchen, a slow tide retracing its lines. She rose from the chair arm and steadied herself on the doorframe. The plate of cookies still held its small spiral, edges set, chips dulled too. Honest brown. The boy arrived first. Hat slid back like a question. "Cake now?" He asked no one and everyone. His mother lifted the bakery lid, revealing a surface so smooth it might send a reflection. Phones gathered. The lighter clicked twice, then made fire behave. 12 flames found air. The room sang. In the communal voice people use when they need to agree on a tune. She stepped aside for the procession. The boy blew, a little spit riding hope. His father laughed and said it counted. Smoke curled softly. The knife waited. Plates fanned along the island, rims glinting. Forks nested in sleeves. The jug of punch breathed citrus. The cake became geography middle corner. Rose claimed by pointing fingers and voices that meant order. "Do you want a piece with a rose?" she asked, gentle, because choices in first minutes mean more than they should. He shrugged, as new teenagers learn. "Middle," he said, as if geometry were a personality. The first slice lifted clean, icing holding its engineered edge only. Then did someone remove the napkins from the cookie plate? A small guest in a tutu reached, then paused, palms hovering like birds over water. "Those are Grandma's," an aunt said. The boy looked over, distracted by his name piped in sugar. He squinted at the plate as though deciding whether it belonged in the picture. The sentence came out easy, borrowed from somewhere careless. "Those are for poor people." The room did not fall quiet. Parties rarely do. Forks hit paper. A plastic knife squeaked. A cheer rose from the den. The sentence found her like a draft finds a neck. She did not lift her hand. She did not correct him in front of lenses and friends. She watched the words settle into napkins as if ink had bled and would not come back out. He had not looked at her when he said it. He had looked past. The way one looks through glare. "Middle," he said again to the cake, mouth already sweet. A cousin shouted for corner frosting. The tutu child took one cookie, then hid it in a cup as if secrecy could make it gentler. She moved her plate a hand's width back from the edge, ordinary distance. Air returned to her lungs like a kettle finishing its first small complaint. She nodded at nothing, which is to say she nodded at the day and told it she had heard. Her daughter-in-law glanced, read something in the set of a shoulder, and began a soft apology. He didn't mean the knife carved another neat square. The sentence didn't have to finish. Meaning travels without translators. "Coffee?" someone asked. "Milk," she answered, and poured. She placed a cookie on a napkin, then removed it, then placed it again, The choreography of a person deciding where to stand in a room that has shifted by an inch dot. The boy asked for another middle. The frosting held. The spiral held. The afternoon, which had meant to be unremarkable, learned a seam and kept going. Later, the balloons would thump the ceiling like slow heartbeats. And no one would remember the exact words except the person who heard them land. She let the sentence pass through her like a draft, then chose the smaller work that steadies rooms. The spiral remained intact. She slid the plate back from the edge another inch, as if saving it from gravity were the only conversation worth having. The kitchen resumed its choreography. Cake squares finding plates. Forks meeting frosting. Punch traveling by ladle in safe arcs. Her daughter-in-law offered a smile with corners that knew better and began to say something gentle. She said, lovely spread, because compliments are a cloth you lay over a sharp corner. The smile steadied. A balloon rubbed the ceiling and knocked once in agreement. She lifted a napkin from the tower that said birthday and folded it over the plate. Not to hide sweetness, only to keep air from carrying it off. The napkin behaved. The cookies kept their quiet heat. She slid the plate nearer the mixer where steam could do its small work without making a scene. Then she reached for the coffee, because hands need tasks when words would tangle. Milk, then pour. 3 clean mugs at the island's calm edge, filled to the inch below the rim. Cream, sugar. She set the bowl and the spoon that matched nothing, a familiar mismatch that steadied her. Someone said thank you. She nodded at the room and at the years that had taught her to make small weather inside a larger storm. The boy passed with cake on a plate and a middle square on his tongue. He did not see her hand on the napkin. She did not look for his eyes. She touched a fork back into its sleeve, aligned 3 napkins so their corners shared a line, and made space for someone else's elbow. When a cousin reached for the spiral, an aunt said after cake, and the hand withdrew. Obedient to schedule, if not appetite, the napkin stayed where she had placed it. Cake diminished by squares. Compliments multiplied by habit. Someone announced games. Someone else appealed to the weather, which had improved without becoming important. She carried her mug to the sink and added water so the bottom would not harden into a story for later. When the last plate returned empty and the first yawn visited the smallest guest, she reclaimed the covered circle and eased it into her bag. The way you rescue a thing from a table that has forgotten its manners. We'll take a few for later, her daughter-in-law said. Automatic, busy with a trash bag that needed a new mouth. Another time she answered, polite, the way curtains are polite. Pulled. Not slammed at the door, she touched the boy's shoulder lightly, as if asking a sleeve whether it would tear. Happy birthday, she said. Thanks, he answered, already on the next step of the day. She put on her coat, set the strap across her chest, and stepped out under the balloon's soft thudding. Rain had resumed its quiet arithmetic. The tin in her bag tapped once against her hip and then fell in with her stride. On the stoop, she paused long enough to let weather choose a speed. Behind her, candles tried a second life in the sink before the faucet ended ceremony. She went down to the sidewalk without hurry. Hands hold what words can't carry in public. The bag felt useful. The plate was covered. The afternoon would go on saying what afternoons say. She would keep moving to the corner, then turn toward a kitchen that believed in mending. For now, rain threaded the afternoon fine as hair, beating the umbrella's ribs and running off in tidy chains. She set the strap across her chest and felt the tin tap once against her hip. The soft weight of sweetness learning to be ordinary again. Balloons bumped the ceiling inside. The door clicked shut. The party's cheer shrank to a hallway echo. Sidewalks kept shallow map shoe prints softening. A strip of ribbon clinging to a hedge. A single candle wick in the gutter. She walked. The way people walk when they carry something warm. Not precious, not casual. A steadiness that asks nothing from weather. Steam slipped from the bag and was gone. At the corner, the bus exhaled and took on new air. Teenagers climbed with the heavy-limbed grace of people deciding whether to sit together or apart. The driver nodded because drivers guard small civilities. She didn't board. She preferred the distance a walk gives for a sentence to turn into something less sharp. The signal changed. Tires whisked water into low fans that fell back quickly. She passed the florist hosing buckets, though the sky was doing it free. Carnations bobbed like polite listeners. The baker 2 doors down leaned a tray toward the window, fogging the glass so the world looked kinder for a moment. She smelled yeast and cocoa. Her own buttered brown lifted to join them and then chose to stay with her, as certain smells do. Under the hardware awning, a man shook his newspaper and folded it as if agreeing with the day. He tipped his chin. She returned the nod, rain beating the brim of her hood. The tin tapped again, a small metronome set to the pace of a person who will arrive when she arrives. She did not hurry. Heat inside the bag settled by degrees. Fragrance stepped down from announcement to fact. She paused at the crosswalk where old trolley rails rimmed the asphalt like a forgotten underline. A cyclist rang once and slipped past, raindrops beating on the cable, housing like a string of small truths. She lifted her foot higher to clear the metal. Habit remembers even when shoes do not need help. A sparrow darted from hedge to curb and back, making errands of its own. A block later, she slowed by the community center's bulletin board, glass-sheeted with wet flyers showing through as soft colors. After-school snacks, one read. Thursday volunteers, another suggested, no guilt attached. She made no decision there in the rain. She let the words write themselves on the day, like pencil raceable, legible enough to find later in a drier room. She turned onto her street, quieter, the kind of block that prefers afternoon. Window boxes leaked a little green down brick. A dog behind a curtain whuffed once to say it knew about her, then gave the window back to light. She checked the bag. The plate lay level, napkin holding its line, the tin's roses beyond it calm as old wallpaper. At her stoop, she collapsed the umbrella over the rail, shook it to a polite damp, and climbed. Keys announced themselves with the metal chatter that makes a hallway sound like own. Inside, the apartment smelled like lemon and the last tea, a combination honest enough to steady grief. She set the bag on the counter. Warmth still held at the center of the plate, the way a day keeps its core even as edges cool. She rested her hand above it, not touching, and let the room take back its shape. The apartment received her with the decency of familiar light. She set the umbrella against the tub, the bag on the counter, and stood a beat longer, letting the room learn the day from her shoulders. Outside, rain-stitched handwriting on the window. The tin on the counter held its peace and kept close. She filled the kettle to the mark and turned the flame low. Water tastes better when it finds heat without hurry. The folded butter wrappers lay square beside the stove. She slid one under a pan to remind herself that thrift is a recipe too. She loosened the napkin from the plate and checked the spiral. Warmth lingered in the middle. Edges had learned the room. She replaced the cover and moved the plate away from the sink's cool breath. She pulled open the drawer where useful things live and lifted the ledger. Black cloth overboard, corners rounded by time, the gold on its spine, now a suggestion. She set it on the table where the light falls even, and opened to the next clean page. Pencil from the mug by Salt. Lead-trimmed eraser grim with years. She wrote the date, the month followed by its number. Then a line, eggs dozen, brown sugar 2, vanilla small, milk pint. Under it, she added a note that carries more weather than cost. Sugar on sale. Her hand paused above the space where commentary might go. She did not write the sentence that had traveled home with her. Ledgers prefer nouns. She let the pencil hover, then set it down. The kettle breathed. She lifted it before it could call. The room by name and poured over leaves in the pot, the amber darkening as if a thought were settling. Steam rose and blurred the corner of the ledger, then cleared. She placed the lid, set the timer for the kind of minutes tea respects, and folded the towel over the back of the chair. Damp shoulders make conversations shorter. From the window, she watched people find their pace under weather. A child in a yellow coat hopped into a puddle and made a crown. A bus sighed at the corner. The florist shook a bucket and made a silver rain within rain. The timer clicked its polite punctuation. She poured. The mug warmed her palms, then cooled, to a temperature that lets thinking proceed without opinion. Cookie smell braided with the tea's quiet. She set one on a saucer and did not bite. Appetite, like anger, benefits from a pause. She turned the ledger back a few pages and reread older totals as if visiting old houses. Flour in February, new sheet pan in March, a note about the oven learning steady after a brief rebellion. 1. Day she purchased 4 pints of milk and wrote, almost as a joke, "Growing boys." The pencil path looked like a life that had made sense. She added one more line today, small and accurate, community board after-school snacks. Not a pledge, only a marker at a crossroads for the version of herself who would pass again. She closed the book far enough to make a soft pocket of air and set the pencil beside it like a companion who understands silence. She tasted the tea. It had cooled past ideal into acceptable, where most afternoons land. She finished half left, the rest to become room, and stood. The plate and tin waited without judgment. The rain eased. She rinsed the cup, set it upside down on the towel, and let the house resume its ordinary breathing. The rain quit the way a faucet quits a last patient drip. Then a clean stop. She buttoned her coat, slid the ledger into its drawer like a book that forgives being closed, and took the canvas bag, folded small, in case a day asked for carrying. The tin stayed home. Decisions way less without props. The community center sat 2 blocks off her route. Brick settled into itself. Windows fogged by gym and pool. She pushed the door and met air that smelled of chlorine and pencil shavings. A staffer at the desk lifted a hand. Buildings like this learn faces faster than names. On the right wall, a corkboard held the city's small ambitions. Colored paper made a field of rectangles. Someone had squared each flyer with 4 tacks. She stepped close, the way you step. Close to anything full of words, and let the board speak. After-school snacks needed Thursdays. 2 to 4, simple foods preferred. No nuts, no citrus. A sign-up sheet hung beneath, ruled columns for name, contact, contribution. 2 lines had been taken in a hand that pressed hard. Many squares stayed blank, polite rather than pleading. Other papers announced adult swim, beginner ballet, tax. Prep on Saturdays, chess club, a lost scarf drawn in pen with hopeful stripes. A child's poster declared a bake sale to save the turtles. Someone had added a green sticker that made the turtles look like they might indeed be saved. She studied the sign-up again. Thursdays suited a kitchen that liked its mornings. She imagined carrying a plate down this hallway, passing the multi-purpose room where chairs stacked in shy columns, hearing the bounce of balls from the gym. She pictured a table under a window, a kettle plugged into a long orange cord, a stack of paper cups that believed in their own sturdiness. She pictured children arriving still damp with day hair, sweated flat by recess. Voices running ahead, the small pause before the ... A pen hung from the board on string. She lifted it and found the points stubborn, coaxed it on the corner of the paper until ink remembered its job. She wrote her name small, the way she writes prices in her ledger, and a number that would find her in a kitchen if it had to. Okay. Under contribution, she put cookies. No claim about kind. The day would decide. The desk staffer called. We can cover. Plates and napkins, as if reading her list of worries before she did. She nodded, the nod a hinge being oiled. Thank you, she said, and meant it as much for the building as for the person in it. On her way out, she pressed a lifted tack back into duty on the corner of a flyer for drumming. Tamped another on a language class sheet that had begun to curl. Small maintenance makes walls look more sure of themselves. She paused at the door for the exact time it takes to feel a room bless a decision. Then stepped into a street that had wiped its face clean. She cut home by the long block past the laundromat. Dryers turned their round promises in the window. A child watched one and sucked 2 fingers, a faith that things will come out warm. She felt for the folded bag in her pocket and let her hand rest there. The day had agreed to be useful. The door with flyers had asked, and she had answered. Nothing ceremonial had occurred. Which is how commitments that last prefer to begin. The community center kitchen wore its years openly. Metal tables kept a soft wave in their surfaces, as if heat had taught them humility. Pans nested like coins, saved for a purpose. The floor wore a map of scuffs that told routes. The clock kept time. Alma met her at the door with a hairnet in hand and a yes already shaped in her mouth. You must be, she supplied her name. Wonderful, Alma said. Do you like the oven hot first or early second? How hot is it here? She asked, smiling. True 200 when it says 190? True 350 if you wait, Alma said, which was the only math that mattered. We have aprons and tea, if the world is louder than you, like children's voices ricocheted in the hall. She set her canvas bag on a table, the tin inside. Clicking once against steel, a sound like tools greeting. Alma poured water into a kettle and set it on a back burner. First Thursdays are simple, she said. Fruit, crackers, cookies, if we have magic. Today we have magic. She rinsed, turned the tap with her wrist, and pointed to a cupboard. Parchment there, gloves if you want them. Nobody minds. Butter fingerprints here. 2 other volunteers nodded from the far counter. Ray sliced apples with the patience of a librarian. Miri counted cups aloud in threes, stopping at 24 as if the number could hold the room. She lifted the tin's lid. The smell that escaped did a small kindness to the fluorescent light. Alma closed her eyes a beat. Oh, you brought the right kind, she said. Kate, the kind that tastes like someone thought about you while the timer ticked. They lined trays with paper. She set cookies in tidy rows, leaving an inch between circles already settled. Alma made placements for napkins, the way people lay out chessboards, squares receptive to future moves. We do third bell at 3:15, Alma said. Then the rush. We hold to a side for the late bus. She liked the rules here. They were not about ownership. They were about arrival, and about saving a little for somebody who might need it later. A boy with a backpack poked his head in to ask if rehearsal was upstairs today. Alma gave directions, then handed him a wedge of apple. He said thanks without looking because shyness sits beside hunger and eats with it. The kettle found its voice. Tea? Alma asked. Yes, she said. They drank from paper cups, warm, in their hands. Ray joined them, apple slices fanned like cards on his tray. Miri wrote Thursday on a masking tape label and stuck it to the cookie bin with an authority that did not boss. A coach leaned in for ice. A custodian borrowed the step stool and returned it with thanks. She checked the oven, though nothing was inside. The knob pointed at ready. The clock decided it was nearly time. Alma touched her elbow. When they come, she said, we hand, not heap, to each. We look them in the face. Someone asks for 3, we ask how their day is, and hand the 3rd anyway. That's a good rule, she said. It's the only one I remember, Alma answered, smiling. Footsteps gathered in the hall like soft rain finding a gutter. Alma lifted the pass-through window. The kitchen rearranged itself, not bigger, only more certain. The trays waited, the kettle rested. The door opened on the first after-school voice and made room for the rest. The bell in the hallway gave its polite double note. And the corridor's tide turned toward the kitchen. Backpacks, bumped ribs, laces flapped. Lockers settled small disputes. Alma slid the pass-through higher, palm flat to metal, and said, "Welcome, scholars," in a voice that had been teaching since before some of them were born. They came in twos and knots. The air changed the way rooms do when weather enters. On sneakers. A girl with a blue beret took the front like someone who'd done it yesterday and last week. To each, Alma reminded the room. Third, if the day was longer than it had a right to be. She stood one step back from the window, arranging the first tray into a neat geography 4 by 5 by 4 spaces mapped 4 fingers. The tin's second stack waited in reserve, lid tilted like a listening head. The kettle clicked down. Satisfied with its own timing, Blue Barrette reached for a napkin as if demonstrating, then hesitated in the space between manners and hunger. "Go on," Alma said. They're best when manners and hunger agree. Cookies left the tray 2 at a time, quick as cards dealt by an honest hand. Crunch met napkin. Steam became warmth. A boy with a too big backpack said, "Thank you," to the counter, then to faces. A tall kid with a trombone case cupped his. In one hand, the smallest one, socks unmatched, tucked a pair into the pouch where pencils live. "First day for these?" Ray asked, tipping his chin toward the tray. "First day for this room," she answered, and meant the fluorescent light, the dented bowls, the particular way good noise gathered here and didn't ask to be translated. A latecomer skidded in on wet soles and stopped himself with both palms on the counter edge, breathing hard on words he had lost on stairs. Alma set 2 on his napkin and 1 more without announcing the surplus. He took them as if learning a lesson. Some extras arrive without making you say the reason out loud. .mir, moved cups like a shell game. Water here, tea there, juice for the ones whose eyes were already too fast. "Tip," she said to a girl who'd been taught to drain. "You have time. Tea." She asked names where faces invited the question and let nicknames do their work. Tea learned who wore braces, who'd lost a tooth to a basketball, who drew dragons without erasing. Third bell divides a day into before and salvage. A kitchen you don't own can feel like you do once hands decide you belong. The second tray went out as neatly as the first, and the bin marked Thursday filled with a rhythmic emptiness. In the lines shallowing, a boy hovered, counting coins, as if the windows sold things by quarters. "No price," Alma said gently. "We trade in days." He put the coins back and almost smiled. When the rush thinned to the late bus hazard, they held to a side. Alma wrote names on napkins, her pen making each letter sit up straight. The hallway cooled, sneakers quieted. A whistle far off signaled. A game kept honest. She slid the final tray toward the window and rested her hands in the warm air above it, palms open. The room, having eaten, exhaled. She thought of the party, the ribboned cake, the sentence that hadn't known its weight, and felt it lift under this light. New room, first batch, sweetness finding its proper audience. Asking for nothing back but a next Thursday, for now. Only that the next day drew itself in pencil quiet lines, erasable if it had to be. At the center doors, a tide of students, pressed through with the pleasant clatter of lockers and weathered sneakers. Hallway light pooled on waxed floors in long rectangles. Announcements crackled and squared themselves into air. Somewhere a practice room worked through scales like someone testing a ladder rung by rung. Outside, the flag's rope ticked the pole. Inside, shoes scuffed, zippers sighed, and the building woke again by third period. The story began to travel without claiming to be a story. "Smelled like cinnamon yesterday," a 7th grader said to no one in particular, making the sentence available to anyone who wanted it. A small boy added to each, 3 if your day ate your lunch, and blushed at his own accuracy. A teacher, shouldering a stack of copies, passed 2 sprawled readers and said, "Save your steps for Thursday cookies," with the calm authority of a weather report. Custodian lights hummed above the closet beside the gym. Raphael, who kept batteries labeled in a neat print and mops standing like respectful soldiers, marked 2 napkins Thursday with a thick black pen. He slid them into the narrow fridge by the office window beside string cheese and a jar of pickles that had survived many fundraisers. For Mateo, he told the fridge, which was as good a witness as any. Mateo came late when the route home took an extra bus and a little courage. Saving is a trade he practiced. At lunch, the cafeteria offered its beige democracy. Trays moved. Voices made manageable weather. Someone's orange rolled in a generous arc and was rescued by a hand that had caught many. A girl opened milk like a safe and failed twice, then succeeded and pretended she'd always intended 3 tries. At the end table, a boy said, "The kitchen gives cookies like a teacher who likes you but can't say it." His friend said no raisins and ate 2 anyway. After school, echoes tested stairwells. Drums in the band room rehearsed thunder under supervision. Coach lined cones and called names with a whistle that believed in vowels. On the bulletin board, the sign-up sheet had gathered 2 more pen marks, tentative as fledglings. Latasha fruit. Mr. B watermelon knife. Someone squared the tape corners again. In the office, the secretary turned a page on a calendar whose numbers leaned forward. Eager, and steadied her peppermint tea with paper clips nested in its saucer. Thursday. She asked Alma as the box of cups passed. Alma nodded with the precision of a metronome. When the bell released the building, shoes translated intent into motion. The kitchen window lifted like a practiced eyelid. The line formed its patient. River. 2 each, Alma said, and the river understood its banks. A child rehearsed please under his breath, forgot, then remembered and brought it back on the second cookie. Someone requested one for a brother stuck in trumpet. Alma slid it without ceremony. Raphael appeared at the side door with a mop in one hand and a small authority in the other. He waited until the first rush became weather rather than event. Mateo. He asked the hall the way a person might. Ask whether a coat has been left behind. A boy with rain still drying on his sleeves lifted his chin. Raphael produced the 2 napkins with their black letters. For later, he said, Blue Berets, off duty from being first, watched the handoff, and decided not to tell anyone anything about it. The kettle clicked down. Trays thinned. A teacher took one on a napkin and carried it down the hall like a reminder to grade humanely. News kept traveling the way good smells do without address, finding everyone. In the quiet after, the kitchen put itself back on its piece. Hinges, pans nested, the pass-through settled. Alma rinsed the last cup and set it upside down. Somewhere, a practice room finished its ladder and closed the light. The hallway kept its echo, small sweetness learning to live there. Thursday arrived with a sky that couldn't decide between brightness and restraint. She measured flour level with a knife, let butter rest until it learned the room, and set the mixer down like a known weight. The card corners softened to kindness kept its place under the magnet. 2 trays cooled on racks that bowed a little in the middle and didn't complain. She covered them with a towel that had once been white and now was useful. The tin closed. With its practiced whisper, she put on her coat and left at a pace that made streets and kitchens agree. The community center had learned their names. Alma waved from the pass-through. Ray set apples and allies and rose. Miri wrote Thursday on new tape, as if the word were a small banner. The kettle settled on its burner with intention. They lined trays the way people set tables for serious conversation space, where hands could arrive without apology. The bell in the hall gave its agreeable double note. Sneakers translated classrooms into afternoon. A trombone case bumped a knee. Blue Beret took her spot as if answering roll. 2 each, Alma said. Third, if your day ran longer than it's right. Cookies left the tray in pairs. A boy practiced thank you on his second try. Miri slid water to someone who had forgotten how to sip. Ray offered apples to the few who liked tart with sweet. The room behaved like a room that knows what it is for Dot. Then he was there without preface, the hat from last weekend gone. Hair calicked by weather and running, mouth colored by a gummy bear or a sports drink. He stepped into the line because lines make decisions easy. He did not see her first, said the pass-through framed faces, but kept the lower half of bodies to itself. Grandparents could be hands before they were histories here. He pressed his palms on the counter edge like any 12-year-old, would carry combinations and instructions all day, and wanted to hold something less theoretical, too. Please, he said, voice newly lowered at the edges. Polite because kitchens and windows encourage it. Alma put 2 on his napkin and smiled the same permission she gave everyone. He looked at the cookies as if measuring them against a picture he hadn't realized he carried. He did not call them anything. He did not need to. She kept her own hands doing ordinary tasks, turning the tray a quarter, straightening a napkin corner that had begun to think about rebellion, moving a cup nearer a small hand. He took one bite the way you test a step after. Rain, the rest followed in quick, efficient crescents. He did not look up yet. A friend bumped his shoulder. Their laughter did its job and stepped aside. Third, if the day was long. Alma offered the room, not him, the phrase traveling on, a tone that never named exceptions as charity. He nodded, a tiny hinge he might have denied later, and slid the napkin forward. She placed the third in the square he'd made, the same way she had placed thirds all. Afternoon, 4 tired eyes and sore ankles and a trumpet section that had eaten the lunch period. No flourish. The rule fits whoever needs it. He looked up because manners eventually ask for eyes. For a beat, the pass-through kept it secret, then didn't. Recognition arrived without theater. He did not flinch. A tea, she did not add sugar to the moment. Thank you, he said. To the window, to the tray, to the hands. The words found the right distance and stayed there. A backpack strap slid off his shoulder. He tugged it back into duty and moved 2 steps aside. His friend said something about practice, about a field that held water, about a coach who preferred grit to weather. He ate the third slower than the second. He left one last crescent and tucked it carefully into the napkin, a decision that looked like saving and might have been. When he turned to go, he paused half a breath, the way a person pauses in a doorway to adjust a sleeve. These are good, he said to air that belonged to everyone. She nodded once. Kama said, come back next week to the hallway at large. Miri drew a smiley face on a paper cup for no one in particular. He went where afternoons go at that hour homework fields. A couch, a screen. The line thinned. The kettle clicked down. She set the empty tray on the counter and felt its heat leave into the room, a warmth becoming general. Outside, the sky finally decided on brightness. Inside, the pass-through learned one more name it would not say out loud and kept the rule that had made this room honest, to each. Third, if the day had been unkind, no questions, no receipts. Evening laid its thin coin of light on the sink and slid away. She stacked the rinsed cups upside down on the towel, set the empty tin to dry with its lid leaning like an elbow, and wrote one line in the ledger because rooms prefer accuracy. Thursday-cookies-center. 2 trays, thirds as needed. She underlined needed once, not as complaint, only as record. The kettle clicked down to its cool. The apartment let the day set. The bell rang on the second small of silence. She did not hurry. She fit the chain, opened to its length, and saw a boy shaped like the day just past hoodie, damp along the shoulders. Hair that had learned its own mind. Shoelace trailing a plan he had not finished. He had a ball under one arm and a folded paper under the other. Hi, Nana, he said, as if the hallway had requested the word and he was supplying it. Come in, she said, because hallways do not deserve conversations. He stepped onto the mat and looked at his shoes, then at her floor, then at his shoes again. They're clean enough to cross, she said, and they were. He sat in the chair that faced the stove, the one that lets a person watch a kettle and not their own hands. She lifted the kettle, the small ceremony friends with no script rely on tea. She asked, which in some houses means you first. He shrugged in the new way that isn't indifference, only careful. Water's fine, he said. She poured, set the glass where condensation would not make a ring, and waited in the manner that keeps a room from telling a person what to say. He unfolded the paper, smoothing it open with precise palms. Fundraiser lived at the top in a confident font. Under it, a list: brownies, cupcakes, store-bought acceptable donations. Welcome. Names of teams in columns. A space waited for a signature in grown-up ink. Coach says, everyone bring something, he said. Store is okay, but homemade. Counts. He said it looks like effort. He glanced at the tin as though tins answered rules. Effort is a good word, she said. He took a swallow of water and found the glass heavier than it had been, a thing that happens when sentences are nearby. I was at the window, he said, and let the rest arrive in its own time. I saw you. Didn't know the kitchen was for everyone. It is, she said. It behaves better that way. He looked at the ledger because books call to eyes. You write it down? I like to know where a day went. He nodded, a hinge remembering it could move. The apology came not as a noun but as the small work of naming purposes. Can I would you could we do cookies? For Saturday. For the form. He tapped the line where a signature should live and did not push the paper across. The ball under his arm breathed a quiet rubber smell into the room. We can, she said, because we is better than you when flour is involved. Saturday morning. The butter needs time with the room. Ski slid the tin toward him. You can carry the roses again. He touched the faded paint with 2 fingers. Not reverence, just inventory. They're not red anymore. They remember being, she said. He looked at the counter. At the knife with the straight spine, at the soft wave in the old cooling rack. Do I have to measure level? Yes, she said. We keep the knife honest. The corner of his mouth tried a shape and decided to keep it small. He set the ball under the chair, laid the form on the table, and found a pen in the mug by the salt without being told. He wrote his name in letters he had recently learned to lengthen. He slid the paper half an inch toward her and then stopped. The distance where respect lives. I said something dumb, he added, not looking up. At the party. The sentence sat on the table like a tool both of them knew how to use and were choosing not to swing. She tipped her head. You've brought better words since. He breathed out like a person who has been let off a bus. A stop closer to home. Okay. Saturday, she said again, setting the time where rooms can find it. 9. Bring an appetite for patience. He stood taller than the last time her doorway measured him. I can do patient, he said, which might have been true, might yet become so. At the threshold, he turned back half a degree. Those window cookies were good. They were for everyone, she said. He nodded, a hinge learning smooth, and went. The latch found the strike plate with its old surety. The apartment eased back into its breathing. She set the form beside the ledger, not under it. Butter would need a plate by morning. The tin's lid leaned like an elbow and waited to be useful. As tins do, Saturday arrived, plain and clean. The kind of morning kitchens trust. She set butter on the plate by the window and watched it forget the refrigerator. At 9, a knock that understood agreements. He stood there with his hair obeying no one and his hands washed to the wrists. Apron, she asked. He nodded, and the string found a knot at his spine. She set the flour canister on the counter and the knife beside it, straight-backed, honest. Scooping isn't counting, she said. We level. He dug deep, lifted a hill, let snow fall back with 2 taps, then drew the blade flat. Little avalanche returned to the jar. Brown sugar next. Pack, release, thud. Like sand, he said. Like a good sand castle, she answered. He cracked the eggs, shell slipped in. She handed him a second bowl and the practice of fishing. Gently. 2 hands until 1 hand can be trusted, she said. He fished. Succeeded. Butter yielded to spoon and then to steel. The mixer dropped into work. He steadied the bowl with his palm. Vanilla ran a small ribbon. Flour, salt, baking soda he sifted and watched the pale weatherland. He reached for the chips. She nodded at the bag. He scraped the sides. Coach says presentation sells, he said. Coach is right, she said, but flavor keeps the table honest. Tasted a pea of dough. He looked at the counter, then at her. Sorry, he said, for the sentence. The room did not flinch. We're measuring better today, she answered. Trays received spoonfuls with decent spacing. 2 inches, she said. He measured with 3 fingers, adjusted. Salt flicked from her small jar at the end. The oven took them and closed its mouth, while the first batch found its shape. She set 2 glasses on the table, milk for him, tea for her. He studied the ledger where it sat open. Do I write it? He asked. Please. He printed under, today's date with letters still negotiating their height. Flour 2. Sugar 1 brown, 1 white. Effort dashed together dot the timer's agreeable note. He opened the oven with care. Steam hugged his face and stepped away. He lifted the sheet as if carrying a pond. Edges first, she said. He listened for the crack. That means set. It came. Next tray, she said, and it went like music after you know the tune. Rotate, space, salt, door. The kitchen filled with the kind of smell that convinces apartments to forgive one another through walls. He leaned against the counter. These will sell, he said. These will feed, she answered. They stacked when the time was right. Paper between layers making its soft hush. He placed the last cookie on top. Not the biggest, not the smallest an anchor, the way she had done. He cut a square of ribbon from a drawer where ribbons retire and tied the tin with a knot more confident than fancy. Carrie? She asked. Carrie, he said. He slid the strap over his shoulder with the care of a person entrusted. At the door, he looked back at the knife aligned with the edge of the board and set it straighter. We keep the knife honest, he said. They left while the room still remembered sweetness. The hallway smelled of paint and somebody's toast. The elevator sighed. He held the tin like a promise that had learned not to brag. Outside the morning stayed plain and useful. They turned toward the school, a walk long enough to set cookies, words. And a day into their right places, the schoolyard smelled of chalk and hot cardboard. Folding tables lined the walkway. Handwritten signs leaned against trays, brownies $2, lemonade $1, cupcakes sold out. He carried the tin-level ribbon, holding its modest bow. She kept the umbrella folded, although the morning had chosen sun. Coach waved them toward a gap beside. The coolers. You're saints, he said, which meant we were short. A jar with tips in thick markers sat between plates. She set the tin down. He untied the bow, lifted the lid, and let the smell name the table. What's our price? He asked. To each, Coach said reflexively, eyes on the field where cones made geometry. She glanced at the line forming small faces, taller ones, parents paging cash. She thought of Alma's window in thirds. Pay what feels right, she said, sliding the jar aside so it wouldn't mistake itself for a rule, or nothing. The sign can improvise. Okay, he said. He wrote on a paper plate with a blunt marker. Cookie steak 2. Add what you like. He taped it down. The first customer, a girl in cleats, read and grinned. She put 3 quarters in the jar, took 2, and said, for the win. He served napkin, pear, eye contact, the thank you that rooms teach. He learned the cadence of hands coming and leaving happy. A father dropped a 5, waved off change, and took 1 for later. 2 friends pooled coins. She pretended not to. See the arithmetic and added a 3rd because weather had baked them darker than morning planned. Best table, someone proclaimed. The tin lightened. He refilled the plate with the economy of a person who knows how close circles should sit. Sun slid across aluminum. Chips turned from glint to matte. A woman in sunglasses stood back, reading the improvisation twice. She reached. Finally, with empty hands. Birthday. She asked him, gently wrong. Fundraiser, he said. But also Saturday. He half smiled. She nodded and took 1 for a pocket he couldn't see. Teammates clattered up, noise preceding them. One elbowed him with ceremonial cruelty. Man, these slap, the tallest declared. Another said, your grandma's got hands. He kept serving, ears pinked but steady. The jar filled strangely coins. Bills, a bus transfer, a note. Thank you for yesterday. Midway through, a child counted pennies and came up short. He slid the plate across anyway. "We're covered," he said. Coach jogged past, lifted 2 fingers and mouthed water. She nodded. He returned with cups. Near the end, a small boy approached with an adult's wallet gripped like a passport. "My brother can't wait in lines," he said. Noise. Placed 2 on a napkin, added a third without making biography perform. The boy left the wallet shut and tapped the plate sign once. "Last tray, 6 left, then 4, then 1. He positioned at north center as if marking a field. "You didn't need it." He held it up. "Coach." "Give it to the scoreboard," Coach said. He turned, found a child in a wheelchair under a shade tent, and walked the last cookie across the grass like a small trophy. The jar looked fuller than a price sheet would have predicted. The sign lay flat, certain. He retied the ribbon without being shown. She closed the tin. They stood a breath longer, letting the day count itself. Then they carried what remained money. "Thanks." A plate with crumbs back toward the door that opens on ordinary kitchens. Their shadows walked beside them, light as paper, sure as habit, and home returned them to familiar light. They set the tin on the table and the jar beside it. Grass smell clung to their sleeves. Sugar rode the air. He untied the ribbon, smoothed it flat, then looped it around to fingers. She brought the ledger and left it closed because some numbers need to breathe before they behave. The room waited with them, even and kind, for counting later. He tipped the jar. Coins slid like rain through leaves. Bills unfolded with travel still in them. A bus transfer fell last. The note landed face up. "Thank you for yesterday. We should count," he said. "We can sort," she said. "Totals have their time. I've made countries across the table. Quarters here, dimes there, pennies a border, no one minded crossing." He aligned the bills by corners and set a rubber band gently, the way one ties hair. She read the note again and slid it under the ledger's first page, where gratitude could keep the spine honest. "What about the transfer?" he asked. "It is proof," she said. "Someone rode farther to be here." He looked at the ribbon on his fingers. "I do." "People ever pay with notes?" "Often," she said. "Notes spend differently. They last longer in drawers." He began to say the apology a third time and found it smaller. "I'm sorry for the sentence that made the room colder." "It warmed again," she said. Helped. She opened the ledger and wrote with the respect numbers deserve. Fundraiser -cookies -table. Under that, contributions sorted, not summed. Note saved. Rebond kept. She handed him the pencil. He printed. "Careful. 2 each. Add what you like." He underlined like as if translating it for himself. They wrapped coins in paper sleeves from the drawer staples, rusted but faithful. He pressed dates onto the ends with her rubber stamp. The ink made its violet vow. "We'll give it to Coach," he said. "He'll make math." She smiled. Coaches love math when it buys cones and water. The last cookie plate held only wreckage. He brushed crumbs into his palm and paused. "Sparrows?" he asked. "Rails by the crosswalk," she said. They went to the window and watched the birds arrive as if on cue, hopping the ties, bright eyes bargaining with wind. He tipped his hand from the sill. Crumbs learned gravity. The birds thanked them with work, not ceremony. His phone chimed and went quiet. He did not look. "Mom asked if you're coming by tomorrow," he said. "It's the way one sets a cup where it won't leave a ring." "If the kettle agrees," she said. "It usually does." He looped the ribbon, practiced the knot, failed, tried again, succeeded. "Could I keep this?" he asked. "Keep the habit," she said. Kay, and gave him the ribbon anyway. They packed the jar money into a paper bag with a square bottom that knew how to stand. He wrote fundraiser on it with the blunt marker and drew a circle he pretended was a cookie. The drawing looked like the moon the old boy once named. He did not know that story. "He will dot at the door." He lifted the tin one more time and set it on. The fridge, a signal 2 days. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she answered. He left without hurry. She folded the towel, rinsed a cup, and closed the ledger without totaling. Some days you count differently, not by sums, but by how a note fits under a first page and a ribbon finds. A new owner who knows what string is for. Sunday carried a quieter light. She folded the towel on the oven handle, checked the kettle by habit, and left with empty hands on purpose. At the building with balloons, now deflated, the bell made its soft two-note. Her daughter-in-law opened with sleeves to the elbows and a look that had practiced words. "You don't have to." The younger woman began, which is how apologies tried to arrive. "I came for tea," he said, which is how forgiveness prefers. To begin, the kitchen had returned to itself. The banner lay rolled on the counter. The table wore ordinary plates, not the foil-rimmed ones, and a loaf waited under a dishcloth. "Sit," said the younger woman. "Ah!" She poured the tea, tasted of mint and tap water that tried hard. They held their cups without clinking. "I heard about Saturday," the younger woman said. "Coach texted, said your table kept them from running out of breath." She slid a plate of pears between them. "Told me he asked you for cookies." A small smile learned its shape. "To use the word effort." "He did," she said. "It fit." The boy clattered down with the thunder a house saves for 12-year-olds. He stopped when he saw her. "Coach says we can get 2 new balls," he reported. He tapped a paper bag and cones. "He says cones are math." "Cones are math," she agreed. He reached for a slice. "I took 2 at the window," he said, as if confessing to a science experiment. 3, because my day was long." He lifted his eyes, then let them land. "Thank you for the 3rd I didn't ask for." "You asked well enough," she said. "Hunger speaks a language I know." "About the party," the younger woman said, letting the phrase stand for a pile of moments. "I should have made room on the table. I should have made room for everything." "The day had its schedule," she said. "We have a better one now." The boy turned a pear slice into a clean moon. "Can I come Thursday?" he asked. "Coach says volunteering." "Is cardio if you stack chairs?" "Stacking chairs is the sport that wins," she said. "We'll ask Alma. Ray will like the help." Miri labels in 3s. "What do I do?" he asked. "2 each," she said. "3rd if a day ran longer than it's right." Look them in the face. Hands clean, knife honest. He grinned at the last instruction. "Knife honest," he repeated. Pocketing the phrase, the younger woman returned with a small tin blue with lemons, lid snug. "I saw one at the market," she said. "Thursdays need containers." She set it beside the pears as if introducing to friends. "It will learn the room," she said. They ate simple things: bread, pear, a spoon of soup. The house recalibrated. He brought out the fundraiser bag and showed the careful stacks. The rubber band, the violet stamp. "Coach made totals," he said. "He likes math when it pays for water." "'Kay, good math," she said. When she stood to go, the boy walked her to the door without being told. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time the word didn't wobble. "I'm learning different sentences." "So am I," she said. On the porch, the ribbons lifted once in a small wind and lay back down. She carried no tin, only the measure of tea and decent quiet. The kettle cooled without complaint again. Behind her, plates found the sink. Water found its temperature. And Sunday held them in an hour that knew how to be kind. The week practiced its steps and reached the day that kitchens favor. She set butter to soften, checked the ledger's last line, and under it wrote a small promise: "Grandson apron." The blue lemon tin waited beside the older roses, colors that had both learned to fade well. A knock composed of 2 quick taps and a second thought. He stood with hair that had argued with a pillow and palms held up like proof. "Clean," he said. She handed him the apron, tied the knot that sits low, and set the flour knife straight. "We keep it honest," he said before she could, and that saved them both a sentence. They mixed like people who had practiced. Pack level, crack, sift. He announced measurements as if calling plays. The dough found its weight. Tray 1 filled, then tray 2. She flicked salt. He counted inches with 3 fingers. The oven closed. The room remembered how to wait. At the community center, Alma lifted the pass-through with extra height for him to see. "Welcome, volunteer," she said, sliding a hairnet across the counter. Ray had apples in straight lines. Miri uncapped a marker and wrote Thursday. The bell did its double note. Sneakers set weather loose. Key took the window, she the trays. "To each," Alma said, and his voice carried the rule along the line. Hands arrived, moved on. He found the rhythm. Napkin, pair, eye contact. A word that wasn't advice. Please traveled both directions. Thank you came back in different accents. A boy he knew from lunch drifted near, feigning indecision. "Is there a price?" The boy asked, coins hidden. "Add what you like," he said, pointing at the jar Mary had labeled with a heart. The boy nodded and put nothing in and took two and stayed to talk about a science fair that would require glue and nerve. The window held them both without choosing sides. Blue Beret arrived late, hair damp and grin stubborn. "Third, if the day was longer than it's right," he offered, unprompted, giving her the sentence like a towel. She took it and let the day sit down. "Someone asked for one for my sister, Trumpet." He slid it across and didn't narrate kindness. A teacher took two and said, "You're fast, Whitaker." He felt his name sit on the room without wobbling. Smiled, small and real, the kind that steadies a room today. Between rushes, he stacked. Cups wiped moisture from the counter's lip and squared the napkins so their corners agreed. When a small hand reached without a napkin, he set one under gently. In the corner, Ray offered apple thirds. Miri stuck a tape label on the empty tin. Good trouble. The late bus delivered 3 stragglers blinking at a changed climate. He wrote their names on napkins while Alma poured tea to the line's end. "For later," he told one boy, and recognized the ledger tone in his own mouth. He did not correct it. After he rolled the cart down the hall, stacking chairs with a patience. That made cardio look like caretaking. Back in the kitchen, they nested trays, turned the pass-through too shy, and let the fluorescent hum be the day's applause. On the walk home, he carried the lemon tin by its sides, not the lid. "I like window work," he said. "It makes sentences." "Better," she nodded. The crosswalk rails gleamed. At the apartment, the ledger waited. He printed one small line and left room after it. Next Thursday already knew its name. Thursday came the way clocks prefer on time, without boasting. She wiped the table, set the ledger where light behaves, and placed both tins in a row, roses and lemons. The knife lay straight beside the flour. Butter softened in the shallow sun. The kettle breathed and then waited. She did not hurry the morning. He knocked the too quick one considered knock and came in with quiet shoes. "Hands," he said. "Clean?" He tied his apron himself a knot he didn't need help to find. They measured as agreements are measured. Level, not heaped, pack, release, thud. Vanilla made its ribbon. Salt flicked like weather. The oven took the trays and closed with its hush dot on the walk. He carried the new tin. She carried the old. "We could label them," he offered. "We could remember," she said. The crosswalk rails shone. At the door with flyers, someone had pressed corners. She smiled at the thumbprint of help. The pass-through lifted. Alma's hello made a room of the window again. Ray lined apples. Miri coaxed the marker. Thursday found the bin. Shoes found floor. Boadies found line. 2 each, he said with the calm of a sign that never yells. The day obeyed. He placed pairs into paper, saw faces, learned names, forgot some, learned again. A late busboy collected 2 for later. Blue Beret arrived on her own time and earned her third. The jar filled with coins and later plans. When the line thinned, he took the towel and learned the circle that dries well. She set fresh rows, the spiral that steadies trays. Alma leaned and said, "You're good at window weather." He shrugged the right small shrug dot after. Chairs climbed into stacks. He moved them 2 at a time. Coach's cardio made caretaking. Miri taped good trouble onto a clean bin and grinned. They left with tins lighter, steps, regular, air tasting of apples. Home received them. She set the kettle to hush the day's clatter. He untied his apron and set it by the hook, not on the chair. They counted none of it. Not cookies given, not coins gathered, not names remembered. She wrote only a line a ledger likes. Thursday window, steady. He added smaller, grandson opera tide alone. They sat while water found its lower voice. I keep thinking about prices, he said. How we didn't set them. She turned the spoon once. Some things are exact, she said. Flour. Under a knife? Some ask us to see who is standing there. He did not argue with fairness. He touched the ribbon in his pocket. Eased it out, practiced the knot that wants an extra breath. The roses looked older, the lemons ready to learn. He glanced at the door for new knocks. Will there always be Thursdays? He asked. There will be a next one, she said. After that, we'll keep listening. They ate one cookie each, because rooms respect witnesses. She put the rest away and turned the tins so their dents faced the wall, a courtesy between old paint and future days. The kettle clicked down. She smoothed the ledger's page and closed it not quite shut, leaving air where gratitude could stand. Rain began without fuss. He rose to go, then washed the 2 cups, aligning them upside down so their rims learned patience. Knife honest, he said at the door. Knife honest, she said back. The latch found itself. She stood a breath longer, then moved the tins a finger's width closer together. The room kept what it could, so the rest would travel well.